Greetings to everyone, Teacher Janet here. Welcome back to my educational channel on biology. In this video, we'll be discussing the nitrogen cycle based on subtopic 8.3 in your biology KSSM Form 5 syllabus. Now, what is the nitrogen cycle? It is the circulation of nitrogen in its different forms through the environment and also in the bodies of organisms like plants and animals. So, is nitrogen important to organisms? Yes, in fact, nitrogen is used in the synthesis of proteins, nucleic acids, and even chlorophyll. So it's a component of these important substances like proteins and nucleic acids and chlorophyll in the body. However, if we look at the reservoir of nitrogen, it is actually the nitrogen gas which is inert, inactive. And this gas makes up 78% by volume of the atmosphere, okay, which is actually a very large volume of the atmosphere. But this gas is unusable because it is inert, it is inactive. So how does it get into the soil where it can be used by plants, where it can be absorbed by plants? And how does it get into the bodies of organisms like animals, like cows and humans? So let's find out more about the nitrogen cycle. Let's look at the learning standard for today's lesson. 8.3.2. Describe the roles of microorganisms in the nitrogen cycle. So we're going to talk about the roles of various types of bacteria in the nitrogen cycle and also the roles of other organisms like animals and plants. Firstly, let's discuss the meaning of the term nitrogen cycle. So the nitrogen cycle is the circulation of nitrogen in its various forms, for example, as nitrogen gas, ammonium ions, or nitrates, through nature, meaning the circulation of nitrogen from the atmosphere into the soil and then into the bodies of organisms, and then back into the soil and so forth. So the nitrogen cycle is the circulation of nitrogen in its various forms through nature. Next, explain why plants and animals need nitrogen. That means what is the importance or role of nitrogen in organisms. Now for plants, plants need the macronutrient nitrogen for the synthesis of chlorophyll, the green pigment that is used to absorb sunlight in photosynthesis. So without nitrogen, or if there's a lack of nitrogen in the soil, plants will not be able to synthesize sufficient chlorophyll. So the leaves will be yellow and the growth will be stunted because plants will not be able to produce enough organic food substances for their growth. Secondly, plants and animals both need nitrogen to synthesize amino acids and from there to synthesize proteins. And thirdly, there's one more compound that contains nitrogen, and that is the nucleic. These are the nucleic acids, such as DNA, the deoxyribonucleic acid, as shown here. All right, this top molecule is a protein molecule. So here is an overview of the nitrogen cycle. So this is very useful for us to know before we discuss the nitrogen cycle in detail. Now, in the overview, we are going to discuss 7 processes that are involved in the nitrogen cycle. Starting with nitrogen gas in the atmosphere. So this gas undergoes nitrogen fixation, whereby the free nitrogen in the atmosphere is combined with other elements like oxygen to form nitrates, and it can be combined with hydrogen to form ammonium compounds. So nitrogen fixation is the process whereby the free nitrogen in the atmosphere is combined with other elements to form compounds in the soil. Now, so nitrates are formed through nitrogen fixation. And there are 3 processes or methods of nitrogen fixation that we will discuss later. So once the nitrates are formed, they are easily absorbed by plants from the soil. Then plants use the nitrates to produce their plant proteins. So after that, animals eat the plant proteins. So this process is ingestion or eating, the act of eating by animals. So when animals eat the plant proteins, they digest the proteins to form amino acids, and then they use these amino acids to make their own proteins. Now, when the organisms die, when plant and animals die, the bodies of the dead organisms will decay and will undergo decomposition, breakdown. All right. So the bodies of dead organisms will be broken down so that the complex substances in the bodies of the dead organisms are converted or broken down into simpler substances like ammonium ions. So when ammonium ions are formed, we call this process ammonification. It's part of the decomposition process. Next, ammonium ions can be converted to form nitrites, NO2-, through the process of nitrification. And then from nitrites, the nitrites are converted to form nitrates, also through the process of nitrification. So nitrification here means the formation of the nitrites and the nitrates. That's why I have the word nitrate, right? Now, after the nitrates are formed, they can be used again by the plants, all right? Absorbed by the plants again. Next, there's another pathway for the nitrates. They can also undergo denitrification to form nitrogen gas in the atmosphere once again. So the word denitrification here, D means to remove the nitrates. Denitrification means to remove the nitrates from the soil, right? Now for nitrogen fixation, there's one method of nitrogen fixation that uses a bacteria called rhizobium to convert the nitrogen gas in the air to form ammonium compounds directly. Okay, so this is one more arrow here. Right, that's the overview of the nitrogen cycle, and the 7 processes involved are stated here as we have discussed. Nitrogen fixation, absorption by plants, ingestion by animals, decomposition, ammonification, nitrification, and then denitrification. So there are few methods of nitrogen fixation. The first one is through the action of rhizobium species bacteria. Please take note when you write the name for the bacteria, you should write the SP beside it. All right, rhizobium species bacteria. SP for species, and then SP dot. All right, so root nodules of legumes or bean plants contain rhizobium species bacteria, which convert nitrogen gas N2 in the air into ammonium ions in the plants or for the plants to use. In return, the bacteria get shelter and carbohydrates from the plants. And this is an example of mutualism where both organisms, the plant and the bacteria, benefit from this interaction. Right, so if we are talking only about nitrogen fixation, we'll focus on this part here about the nitrogen fixation process. All right, so root nodules of legumes or bean plants, such as long beans or peas, and other plants like groundnuts also have roots that have, these plants have roots that have swellings, okay? And inside the root nodules or swellings, there are lots of these rhizobium species bacteria that have the ability to convert nitrogen gas in the air into ammonium ions, NH4 positive, in the root nodules. So this is the important part of the notes for nitrogen cycle. And then as a side note, in return, the bacteria gets some benefits from the plant also. It gets shelter and a place to live, right, inside the root nodules, and carbohydrates from the plants. So this type of interaction is called mutualism, where both organisms benefit from this interaction. All right, this will be discussed in another chapter too. So I help you, you help me. That is the type of interaction between the legumes and the rhizobium species bacteria. Now, the second process of nitrogen fixation is lightning. So lightning occurs in a thunderstorm. When you hear the thunder, then there's lightning and thunder that goes together. It's the lightning that is of a high temperature. So it can oxidize the nitrogen to form nitrogen dioxide gas in the air during a thunderstorm when it rains. And there's thunder and lightning. So this nitrogen dioxide then dissolves in the rainwater to form the acids, nitrous acid and nitric acid. And when these nitrous acid and nitric acid fall to the ground, they react with certain compounds in the soil to form the salts called the nitrates. Alright, then these nitrates are the compounds that can be absorbed by the plant roots. Alright, so to understand further, I'm giving you the equations, the chemical equations for what happens for the reactions that occur when lightning strikes. But you don't really have to memorize this. Maybe it's important for chemistry, I don't know, but for biology, we use it to help us understand what we have explained here, all right, which is also found in the textbook. So you need to be able to explain it in this way. Now, firstly, as we said, lightning in the thunderstorm oxidizes nitrogen to nitrogen dioxide. How does that occur? You see, when lightning strikes, the high temperature of a lightning bolt will break the bonds of these nitrogen molecules. So now the free nitrogen atoms will react with the oxygen. It will bond to oxygen to form first nitrogen monoxide, and then when it combines with other oxygen molecules, the nitrogen monoxide will combine with the oxygen molecules to form nitrogen dioxide. This is a gas. So when it rains, there is water. So this gas will dissolve in the water. So NO2 plus H2O to form the acids, nitrous acid HNO2 and nitric acid HNO3. Then these acids fall to the ground, where in the soil they will react with compounds like calcium oxide. Okay, so calcium oxide plus the acid is sort of a neutralization process. It will form water and the salt. The salt is calcium nitrate. So from the nitric acid becomes nitrate, calcium nitrate, and other compounds that have nitrates in them. So in this way, the soil will become enriched with the nitrates from the rain water. Let us now discuss the nitrogen cycle in detail. So all our explanations and the diagram here are based on the textbook content. Now, in the exam, it's important that your answers that you write for the essay or structured answers, it's important that all the answers are based on the textbook content as far as possible, because most marking schemes will be based on the textbook, unless the answer is not found in the textbook. So let's start. We begin with atmospheric nitrogen, N2 in the air. So this is an inert or inactive gas. Now, through the process of nitrogen fixation, textbook use the term nitrogen fixing process. Okay, the nitrogen fixation process. Through this process of nitrogen fixation, the atmospheric nitrogen is converted into ammonium ions, all right, and nitrate ions. So there are three methods of nitrogen fixation. The first one is through the use of nitrogen fixing bacteria that live in the root nodules of legumes. Now, this bacteria is Rhizobium species bacteria. Now, apart from Rhizobium species bacteria, another bacteria that has the same, that carries out the same process is Azotobacter species bacteria, which is free living. That means it just lives independently in the soil. It's not inside any plant, right? But these two, Rhizobium species and Azotobacter species, carry out the same process, whereby they fix the nitrogen from the atmosphere and convert it into ammonium ions, NH4+, in the soil via the nitrogen fixation process. All right. Now, another method of nitrogen fixation is when lightning occurs in a thunderstorm. The lightning will oxidize the nitrogen. So the nitrogen will combine with oxygen in the air to form nitrogen dioxide. Then this nitrogen dioxide dissolves in rainwater in the atmosphere to form nitrous acid and nitric acid. When they fall to the earth, when these acids fall to the earth, they react with other compounds in the soil. They react with other compounds in the soil to form nitrates in the soil. So this method of nitrogen fixation is called atmospheric fixation. All right. Now, the third method of nitrogen fixation is through the production of fertilizers like ammonium fertilizers and also fertilizers containing nitrates. Right? For example, in the Haber process, you may have studied in chemistry, nitrogen is combined with hydrogen to form ammonium compounds. So when these compounds that contain ammonium and nitrates are put into the soil by farmers, then it increases the concentration of nitrates in the soil. All right. So next, let's say now the nitrates are formed in the soil. What happens to the nitrates? The nitrates are easily absorbed by plant roots. So they are used by plants to produce plant proteins. Then when plants are eaten by animals, animals digest the plant proteins to form amino acids, and then they use these amino acids to build their own animal proteins, to form their own animal proteins. Now, when plants and animals die, decomposition is carried out by decomposers such as bacteria and fungi. So these decomposers will break down the bodies of these dead organisms and also break down the animal waste that they produce to form simpler substances such as ammonium ions. All right. So these fungi and bacteria are the saprophytic fungi and bacteria. Okay, so now the protein in the body tissue is broken down to form ammonium ions during decomposition. And the process of formation of ammonium ions is ammonification. Next, ammonium ions are converted into nitrite ions, NO2-, by the nitrifying bacteria called Nitrosomonas. All right? And this process is called nitrification. Then nitrite ions, NO2-, are converted to form nitrate ions, NO3-, through the nitrification process by nitrifying bacteria called Nitrobacter species. So please take note that for the conversion of ammonium ions to nitrite ions, Nitrosomonas species bacteria is involved. Think of the word Nitrosomonas, mo here, MO, right? And ammonium also have a mo there. Okay, so Nitrosomonas species converts the ammonium ions into nitrite ions. And then Nitrobacter converts the nitrite ions into nitrate ions. All right. Finally, after that now, the nitrate can be reabsorbed by plant roots, and then it will undergo this cycle again. All right. Now, another pathway for the nitrates is that the nitrates can undergo a process called denitrification by denitrifying bacteria, which convert the nitrates in the soil into nitrogen gas in the air. So this will complete the whole nitrogen cycle. All right. So this denitrifying bacteria will reduce the amount of nitrates in the soil because they will convert the nitrates back to atmospheric nitrogen. So that's the whole process or whole nitrogen cycle. Now let's discuss the learning standard, which is to describe the roles of microorganisms in the nitrogen cycle, the roles of microorganisms like bacteria and fungi. So this is 10 marks. It can be asked in the essay question for SPM. All right. Now, apart from that, this set of notes can be copied, and it's very easy to understand using these notes because I've tabulated it right into and divided into the process, the name of the process, the explanation, and then the equation. For equation, we do not need to know the chemical equation, but just a general word equation of the product form, the substrate and the product form. Okay, so let's start with the first process in the nitrogen cycle, which is nitrogen fixation, carried out by bacteria and also caused by lightning and also industrial fertilizers, right? So let's start with bacteria. So we have explained this, so I'm just going to read through very quickly. Two types of bacteria that carry out nitrogen fixation are nitrogen fixing bacteria like Rhizobium species in the root nodules of legumes. So these are not free-living, they live in the root nodules of legumes. And the free-living nitrogen-fixing bacteria is Azotobacter species, okay, which doesn't live in the plant roots. They just live in the soil. Now, both these bacteria fix the nitrogen gas N2 from the atmosphere by converting the nitrogen gas N2 into ammonium ions NH4 positive via the nitrogen fixing process. Now, secondly, lightning in a thunderstorm oxidizes nitrogen to form nitrogen dioxide gas, which dissolves in rainwater to form nitrous acid and nitric acid. When these fall to the ground, they will react with compounds in the soil to form nitrate salts. Thirdly, industrial fertilizers provide the ammonium fertilizers and nitrates to the soil, directly to the soil. Okay, so for lightning and industrial fertilizers both form the nitrates in the soil. For bacteria, they form the ammonium ions in the soil, but these ammonium ions can be converted to nitrates by other bacteria. So you can copy these notes into your notebook if you want to. Here's the second part of the answer on the role of microorganisms in the nitrogen cycle. By the way, the numbers here in green refer to the numbers in the diagram of the nitrogen cycle earlier. If you are not using this or referring back to the diagram, then you can just ignore the numbers here. Right, so let's look at number 2. After nitrogen fixation, the nitrogen in the atmosphere has combined with elements to form nitrates in the soil. So number 2, the second process is absorption of nitrates by plant roots. So the nitrates are absorbed by plant roots and used to synthesize plant proteins. Next, ingestion by animals. So when plants are eaten by animals, the nitrogen gets transferred to the animal's tissues, and the animal uses these plant proteins to form their own proteins, which are the animal proteins. Next, when plants and animals die, decomposition occurs. So this is number 4. Now, decomposition is carried out by decomposers such as bacteria and saprophytic fungi, like mushrooms. All right? So saprophytic bacteria and fungi break down the dead bodies of organisms, and they convert the complex substances inside the bodies of dead animals and plants into simpler substances. For example, ammonia. So therefore, one of the processes involved during decomposition is ammonification, which is the production of ammonium ions. Protein in body tissue is broken down into ammonium ions NH4 positive via ammonification. Number 6. So after ammonification, we have nitrification. Ammonium ions are converted into nitrite ions, NO2 minus, via nitrification by the nitrifying bacteria such as Nitrosomonas species. Then B, nitrite ions are converted to nitrate ions, NO3 minus, by nitrifying bacteria such as Nitrobacter species. So this is the second type of nitrifying bacteria. All right, the first type is Nitrosomonas species, and the second example is Nitrobacter species. Now, nitrates formed are then absorbed by plant roots again and are used to synthesize proteins in plants and then in animals. Number 7, denitrification. Denitrifying bacteria converts nitrates in the soil into nitrogen gas through the process of denitrification. So that completes the nitrogen cycle. So test yourself. Now the first question. The diagram shows a part of the nitrogen cycle. What compounds are represented by P, Q, and R? Okay, so take a moment to read through this question and pause the video, try to find the answer here. And also question 2. Pause the video and try to answer the question now that you have studied the nitrogen cycle. All right, let's look at the answer. So what compounds are represented by P, Q, R in this nitrogen cycle? Now, when you are looking at a diagram of the nitrogen cycle, it may be slightly different from the one in the textbook. So important thing to take note is where is the source, first of all, the reservoir of nitrogen. So look for the label with nitrogen gas in atmosphere or atmospheric nitrogen, okay? Or just nitrogen gas, N2. So this, we start off with this, right? And then next, look for the nitrates. So here, of course, the nitrates are not labeled. It could be P, Q, or R, right? So here you have to note the microorganism or bacteria that is involved. For example, here from nitrogen gas, by using or by the action of Azotobacter species bacteria, P is formed. All right. So if you think carefully, Azotobacter species converts nitrogen gas into what? Yes, into ammonium compounds, not nitrates, right? Ammonium compounds. Same for Rhizobium species bacteria, right? They convert the nitrogen gas into ammonium compounds, and then Nitrosomonas converts ammonium ions or compounds to nitrites first. And then Nitrobacter species converts the nitrites into nitrates. The nitrates can be converted back to nitrogen gas to form nitrogen gas in the atmosphere through the use of through the role of denitrifying bacteria. Okay, so P is ammonium or ammonium ions or ammonia, and Q is nitrites, R is nitrates. The answer is C. Okay, so next, let's look at the second question. The diagram shows the roots of a legume plant, a bean plant. Which of the following statements is true about the process in X? Now we know that X is the root nodule that contains the bacteria called Rhizobium species. So it involves Nitrosomonas species. No, Nitrosomonas species is not found in the nodule. Now nitrogen gas is converted into ammonium ions. This is correct, right? This is the action of Rhizobium species bacteria, where it can carry out nitrogen fixation and convert nitrogen gas into ammonium ions. So B is correct. Now let's look at C. The process is nitrification. No, it's fixation of nitrogen. Nitrification is different, all right, as we have studied. So nitrification occurs when nitrites are converted to nitrates, as an example, or when ammonium ions are converted to nitrites, or when nitrites are converted to nitrates. This is nitrification. And then, so this process here in the nodules, root nodules, has nothing to do with nitrification. Okay. Now next, it reduces the fertility of the soil. This is wrong. It's the opposite of it. It will increase the fertility of the soil because of the addition of ammonium ions in the soil, which can be converted into nitrates. So the answer here is B. Let's look at 2 more HOTS questions. Let's go on to some structured questions. HOTS question. Why do plants grow faster after a thunderstorm? So in a thunderstorm, there will be lightning, right? So what is the effect of lightning in the atmosphere? So pause the video for a while and try to answer this question. Right, let's look at the answer. In the atmosphere, heat from lightning causes bonds of nitrogen molecules to break. Free nitrogen atoms combine with oxygen to form nitrogen dioxide through oxidation. So we are talking about the action of lightning that causes the formation of nitrogen oxide through oxidation, whereby the nitrogen atoms combine with oxygen. And then this nitrogen dioxide dissolves in the rainwater. It will form acids, which are nitrous acid and nitric acid. So this acid will fall to the ground together with the rain. And the acids react with minerals in the soil to form nitrates. Nitrates are not nitrites. Nitrates, which is a plant nutrient and, in this case, a natural fertilizer that are needed for synthesis of chlorophyll and for faster plant growth. So the plants will grow faster. A few days, after the thunderstorm, you see the grass is green and it's growing very well, right? The grass on the ground. So, or even plants that you have grown in pots and so forth, they're exposed to the rain. So the rainwater that is formed or that falls to the earth during a thunderstorm contains these acids, nitrous acid and nitric acid, which can be converted to form nitrates in the soil. And this will increase the content of nitrates in the soil, which will cause faster plant growth. Let's look at another SPM past year question. Question 4. Explain the importance of planting legumes in crop rotation. 5 marks. So this question can be asked in the essay section. It is an application question and a HOTS question. Now, legumes are bean plants, as we have studied. How about crop rotation? Crop rotation is a process whereby a farmer plants crops, different crops, in a sequence on the same piece of land in a given amount of time, maybe in a year. So maybe in a year, the farmer may plant 4 crops in succession, 4 different crops or 4 different types of plants in succession. First, he may plant the legumes, followed by the fruits like watermelon. Then he may plant green vegetables, and then he may plant bulbs like onions and garlic. Right? So one of the plants that is usually planted in crop rotation are the legumes. Now, so what's the importance and the benefit of planting legumes in crop rotation? So take a moment to think about the answer and try to write down your own answer. Try to find 5 points to write based on your knowledge of the nitrogen cycle. Okay, so you can pause the video for a while. Right, let's look at the answer. So straight away, zoom in on the root nodules of the legumes. The root nodules of legumes or legume plants contain Rhizobium species bacteria. Now, sometimes legumes are called leguminous plants, right? So the root nodules of these plants contain the bacteria called Rhizobium species. So what is the process that is carried out by Rhizobium species bacteria? Yes, it is nitrogen fixation. So these bacteria carry out nitrogen fixation and elaborate on this word, this term, nitrogen fixation, by converting nitrogen gas, N2, in the air into ammonium compounds for the legumes to use. But after that, when the legumes die, the farmer will cut off the stem, all right, after that season when he has already planted and harvested the legumes, he will cut off the stems of the legumes, but the roots are left in the soil and the roots will decompose. So when the roots decompose, you will release the ammonium compounds from the root nodules into the soil. So it will fertilize the soil, right? So the effect of producing these ammonium compounds in the root nodules is that the legumes replenish or increase the nitrogen content in the soil, or increase the ammonium content or nitrate content in the soil. All right. Because from ammonium compounds, bacteria will convert the ammonium compounds finally into nitrates, which can be absorbed by the plant for the growth of the plant. Another point is that we can say through this method, the soil becomes more fertile, and it also reduces the amount of chemical fertilizers, the artificial fertilizers that farmers need to use. So the soil will be more fertile for the faster growth and higher yield of other plant crops that are planted on that land after that. So this is the end of the video. Thank you for viewing this video. I hope that you have benefited from it. Please do share, like, and subscribe. Until we meet again, goodbye.